Danish wilderness solo becomes first two-person survival team. Shocking arrival. 12 survivors split into 6 teams. Each duo dropped in Norway's extreme cold polar region. Here they must build shelters, find food, and avoid accidents. Whether brothers or lovers, they could fall apart at any moment. The last standing pair wins $500,000. Riding their self-assembled dinghies, contestants reach their survival points. First up, Danielle, new to this wild land, feels both nervous and excited. She finds decent flat ground by the shore. Danielle must build a shelter in 2 days before her boyfriend arrives. Meanwhile, her boyfriend Patrick hikes 10 kilometers away, carrying a 50-kilogram backpack. As the only young couple, they are confident about surviving. Before the contest, Danielle was a full-time flight attendant, dating Patrick for 2.5 years. Patrick, not just any boyfriend, has over 10 years of deep sea diving experience and is adept at wilderness survival. Usually meeting in hotels, they join the contest to buy their own house. Patrick, exhausted and soaking wet, admires the scenery briefly before checking his compass. Danielle starts building the shelter, pulling a rope for the ridgepole and covering it with a tarp. Once the corners are secured, the shelter is complete. The second entrance, sisters Martha and Camilla, split tasks between building the camp and hiking. Martha finds wild blueberries, though not many, enough for dinner. She worries about not having enough food for Camilla. Continuing to the forest, she discovers a stream and drinks eagerly. With water and food nearby, Martha decides to set the camp there. Back in Norway, the sisters run an organic food wholesale business, selling fresh vegetables. Living together, they have great understanding and eagerly anticipate the contest to expand their market. After landing and soaking in nature, Camilla heads towards Martha. The third team, brothers Emil and Nicholas, face their challenges. Emil, taking on the hike, finds a wild frog but releases it, unaware of its protein value. Nicholas, just landed, is oblivious to the wilderness's harshness. He quickly sets up a temporary shelter. Before the contest, the brothers dreamed of biking around the world but lacked funds. Their goal in the contest is to fund their dream. Emil, not resting much, finally finds a spring and revitalizes himself with cool water. He continues towards Nicholas, who has finished the makeshift shelter and starts on a more durable one. The ground cloth is hardly enough for both to sleep on. He found a place with slightly less wind and immediately started working with a saw. It must be said, the young man's strength was impressive. He chopped one log after another, quickly constructing a conical frame. Over at the couple's side with Patrick, while his girlfriend was still enjoying tea and the scenery at the camp, he had already walked to the point of exhaustion. Not long after, he was blocked by a raging river. He dared not cross rashly through the middle, but found a shallower part along the riverbank and cautiously moved forward with the help of his walking stick. Fortunately, leveraging his weight advantage, Patrick eventually made it to the other side. Meanwhile, Danielle was making the bed at the campsite, ensuring the ground was smooth to prevent the stones from affecting their sleep. She collected all the visible blueberries around, knowing Patrick would be hungry upon return. Over at the brothers' duo with Nicholas, he decided to set up the fishing net first since fish were the easiest food to get here. He carefully went to the lakeside with the fishing net. Since he had only trained for 5 days before the competition, his first attempt was quite clumsy. By the time he had set up the net, it was nearly afternoon. He now hoped to have a big meal by the next morning. At the sisters' duo with Martha, she could not bear the hunger and went fishing by the shore. As dusk approached and waiting was no longer viable, Martha secured several fish hooks by the shore and decided to check on them the next day. As dusk fell, the hikers began setting up their tents. They were only staying overnight, so the accommodation did not need to be elaborate. In the early morning at Patrick's site, he slept soundly until he suddenly saw someone standing in front of him, which nearly gave him a heart attack. Upon closer inspection, it was just his pants drying, a sight that could scare anyone in the middle of the night. Patrick even laughed at the scene himself. On the third day, Nicholas eagerly checked the fishing net. He hadn't been very hopeful, but soon pulled up a small trout, followed by several more. He was thrilled and successfully caught 6 wild fish, hurried back to camp to cook them over a fire. After boiling for several minutes, the plain fish soup was ready. He quickly tasted it, not as delicious as home-cooked, but it was energizing. He licked the lid of the pot clean, not wasting a drop. Back with Martha, She checked the fish hooks from yesterday, but only caught a tiny fish, hardly enough to fill a tooth gap. However, finding any food in the wilderness was already impressive. After cleaning the fish, she kept it for her sister. In addition, she picked many wild mushrooms, planning a big meal with her sister. Meanwhile, Camilla, exhausted from continuous hiking, had blisters under her feet. After a short rest, she continued on her way and eventually found the cove where her sister was. Hearing a clicking noise, Martha responded. Surprised at her sister's quick arrival, they shouted and walked towards each other, meeting in the small forest. Hearing that her sister had saved some grilled fish, Camilla ran to the campsite. After meeting, they had endless conversations. After a brief rest, they prepared to set up the fishing net. Since her sister was a novice, Martha took great pains to teach her. After over half an hour of arguing, they divided the work and went to the lakeside. It took half the day, but they finally set up the fishing net and then sat by the lake, catching up on old times. Back with the couple, Patrick, not long into their walk, found another breathtaking view that made them stop and appreciate it. Just then, a herd of 14 reindeer ran across a distant hillside, including one particularly large one staring at him. Encountering such a sight alone was rare, and Patrick, busy with his journey, had no intention of hunting. He marveled at the natural scene and then continued his journey up the ridge. When he reached the mountaintop, he finally saw a lake where his girlfriend Danielle was likely to be. Thinking of this, he felt a surge of energy and quickly reached the small forest. As he walked, he started calling out for Danielle, who soon heard Patrick's shouts and responded, allowing them to locate each other. They then rushed towards each other relentlessly and were overjoyed to tears upon meeting. At that moment, the sweet smell of their love filled the entire forest. Seeing the large bed Danielle had set up for them, Patrick was overjoyed. Together they set up a spike net, and Danielle felt assured of survival upon Patrick's arrival. Heading over to the brothers' team, Emile, he climbed several hundred meters along the ridge but was blocked by a swamp. Opting not to detour, he braved forward. Fortunately, the mud wasn't deep, and he soon reached the other side, albeit with damaged shoes. Meanwhile, his brother Nicholas was building a shelter. Considering their height of over 6 feet, the shelter had to be adequately sized, including a comfortable single bed. When Nicholas heard his brother's shouts, he immediately ran up the mountain and found Emile had already completed his task. The brothers warmly greeted each other and Nicholas introduced Emile to the campsite. They only had one bed, so they hurried to set up the camp before dark. After 2.5 hours of hard work, their cozy shelter was ready. Now with a fire going, nothing could be more comfortable. Anne, another contestant, was initially terrified upon landing, but soon pulled out a map and compass, readying herself for a 12-kilometer trek to meet her husband, Bjorn. Meanwhile, Bjorn had already reached the shore and decided to build a shelter there. After setting up a simple survival shed with a waterproof cover, he tested it and found it perfect. Now, he was ready to live in the wilderness with Ann. Before the competition, the couple, who lived on a farm and loved hunting, were confident in their survival skills. Ann, having served as a volunteer soldier for 2.5 years, was notably skilled. Father-son duo Garl, 65, and Mark, 18, also joined the competition. The son, never having been far from home, was tasked with a simple trekking route. Meanwhile, Garl quickly set up a shelter, but decided against making a bed before his son's arrival. He had planned to check the surroundings, but opted to rest in the warm sun instead. Finally, Mark, struggling through the muddy path, was dismayed when his new shoes broke. A bad start given the long journey ahead. The area mainly consists of mountains, waters, and forests. He quickly erected a shelter nearby and even built a campfire. Without the company of a mobile phone or computer, he could only meditate to pass the time. At this moment, he missed his friend Victor, who was far away on the other side. As the only contestant with a physical advantage this season, Victor faced significant challenges in hiking and had to rest shortly after starting. Before the official competition, Casper and Victor, who had been friends since childhood, lived and worked together, sharing years of friendship. Their only notable skills were fishing and collecting herbs. They were well aware of each other's capabilities and believed they could win the championship barring any surprises. However, Victor had not gone far when the mosquitoes here quickly targeted him. They could even bite through his clothes to reach the skin. After briefly confirming the direction, he quickly packed his bags and set off, reaching where the couple, Anne, was located. After a long trek, Anne was exhausted, and her throat was dry as if about to smoke. Fortunately, she heard the sound of water nearby, and sure enough, when she hurried over, a rushing river blocked her path, which excited her. Without assessing the situation further, she immediately took out a cup and drank eagerly. Considering that it would be dark in 2 hours, Anne decided to spend the night there. Meanwhile, other hiking contestants began setting up their camps. Due to his size, Victor was already exhausted and could only lie in his tent for a good sleep, worried about not finding a water source along the way. He placed a pot on the ground to catch rainwater. Without any protein source, he lay in the camp and rested. On the third day, the father-son duo, Garl, managed to catch 14 fish despite Garl's poor photography skills. The catch ensured they wouldn't worry about food for the next few days, and he even brewed himself some leaf tea to relax his muscles. Casper, aiming to catch fish early, set up his fishing net at the lake. Skilled in swimming, he quickly arranged the net. Victor had just woken up, gulped down some rainwater collected last night, and faced a high mountain that made him consider quitting for the first time. Anne became exceptionally excited when she reached the plains and saw an old moose staring at her. Unable to do anything, she just watched it leave and admired the beautiful surroundings briefly before moving on. After a long walk, she finally spotted her husband's location. However, reaching him required circling a lake, turning a day's journey into 2. Not wanting to exhaust herself, Anne decided to rest there for the night as her feet were already sore. Victor found the path increasingly rugged as he walked further. Studying the map for a long time, he was clueless about how to navigate the terrain bordered by cliffs on both sides, where a slight misstep could lead to a fall. Previously excited, Victor instantly lost his motivation and just lay down in an open area. With no protein intake for 3 days and stuck in place, Victor contemplated quitting the race, unsure how much longer he could endure. At Garl's side, while grilling fish at noon, he suddenly heard something in the bushes. Turning around, he realized his son had traveled a long distance to see him. Despite the long journey and exhaustion, there was no embrace between father and son. Garl quickly served the cooked fish, and they sat down to enjoy the meal together. After a brief half-hour rest, Garl took his son to the lakeside for fishing, seizing the opportunity to hone his son's skills. Anne, having packed up in the morning, prepared to cross the river in front of her before the weather changed. She found a spot where the river was relatively calm. She walked in leaning on a cane, nearly slipping and falling into the water on the way. Luckily, the river was not very deep, and she soon reached the opposite bank. Without time to rest, she headed directly towards her husband. Following a sharp shout, Bjorn, who was sleeping at the campsite, hurried out to check. Eventually, the two met successfully in the small woods and quickly returned to the camp to rest. Thanks to Bjorn's preparation of fish in advance, she eagerly devoured it. Today, Casper checked the nets, eagerly heading to the lake. As soon as the fishing net was pulled up, he caught the first small lake trout. Incredibly, more fish came with each pull. In just a few minutes, he caught 9 small fish. He processed the fish right by the lake, ready to enjoy it with his buddy. Meanwhile, Victor, after 2 days of tough trekking, finally crossed the high mountain. As night fell, he set up his tent to rest. On the 5th day, as Casper was cutting trees at the campsite, he suddenly heard his teammates call. The moment they saw each other alive, they were overjoyed and began asking about each other's families before even reaching each other. They successfully met by the lake. Garl and his son decided to quickly build a larger campsite. They started by tying a horizontal beam to a tree trunk, then fixed 2 branches across each other for stability, and fortified the windbreaks on both sides. After covering it with a tarpaulin, they had a substantial shelter. They were the most stable team with plenty of fish to eat. However, their happiness was short-lived due to an accident. The inexperienced son accidentally chopped his own hand while cutting wood, causing blood to spurt out. Despite the first aid kit's bandages, Garl had his son call for help for safety. A speedboat soon arrived, and the doctor recommended hospital treatment, forcing them to withdraw from the competition. Garl suppressed his anger, realizing that his son's safety was more important than the competition. With the father-son duo's withdrawal, 5 teams remained. On the 6th day, the Nicholas brothers woke up satisfied with their shelter, but decided to build a chimney to avoid being choked by smoke. They cut a hole in the tarp and surrounded it with stone slabs. However, due to possibly poor craftsmanship, smoke still escaped through the door, engulfing the campsite. Nicholas, overwhelmed by the smoke while adding wood, had to extinguish the fire to think of another solution. Victor and his friend planned to rearrange their fishing nets. Without suitable tools, they tied stones to the rope and threw it across the river. After many attempts due to lack of breakfast, Emil had to go to the other side to retrieve the rope. After much effort, they managed to set up the fishing net, hoping to have a feast the next day. Arriving at the couple's side, yesterday, they spent a day expanding the shelter, mostly relying on physical strength for the work. Fortunately, they had already set up the barbed nets yesterday. Today, barring any surprises, was a day of harvest. The two brought ropes to the lake, with boyfriend Patrick taking the lead. As the barbed net was slowly pulled ashore, a large brown trout soon surfaced, followed by a second catch. They were thrilled and immediately took their catch back to camp to enjoy. This was their first protein meal in 5 days, greatly satisfying both. Switching to the sisters' side. So far, they haven't had to worry about food, but their priority was to reinforce their shelter. They chopped down small trees from nearby, building the basic framework of the house and reinforcing it with branches. Once the entire roof was covered with branches, they topped it with a waterproof tarp. The excess wood was not wasted either, as it was used for firewood. After the last wall was secured, their deluxe survival shelter was complete. It was small but fully functional for the sisters' daily needs. After finishing, Martha didn't rest but decided to gather herbs nearby, which could be used for making tea. This plant, called the public goat, had excellent heat clearing and detoxifying properties. She gathered a little, planning to make tea for her sister that evening. On the 7th day, we visit Anne and her husband. Today, they had an important task: to do whatever it took to get fish. They had planned to build a boat days earlier to set nets in the center of the lake. The boat was made simply by binding sticks into a frame and wrapping it with a waterproof tarp. Prepared, Bjorn set out in the boat, retrieving the net set yesterday, which surprisingly had caught nothing. Just as they were about to return home hungry, another net stirred. A slightly larger trout surfaced, exciting Anne. They quickly retrieved it, and although it wasn't as big as expected, it meant they wouldn't go hungry that night. With their energy replenished, the couple decided it was time to build a permanent shelter, as staying in a tent restricted their movement too much. Meanwhile, back at the couple's side, by now they were both listless with hunger. To catch fish, Patrick suggested building a fishing platform right outside their home, which would make fishing and net setting very convenient. However, his girlfriend quickly dismissed his ideas. Despite several more suggestions, none pleased her. Frustrated with a partner who didn't seem to know much but was very assertive, Patrick could only look on helplessly. Eventually, their hunger became unbearable, and they went to check the old fishing spot. Fortunately, they caught 3 lake trout. Though small, they were lucky to have any food at all. Perhaps feeling guilty, Danielle then volunteered to set up another net in a new location. When they arrived, not wanting to get their clothes wet, Patrick struggled to enter the water due to his short boots. In the end, they sat by the shore and decided to throw the net to the opposite bank with stones. Even in loving couples, such environments can lead to challenges. Moving on to the brothers. Their task today was still to build a chimney. After estimating the height with some logs, they decided to build the chimney inside. After a busy afternoon, they managed to erect a man-height chimney. Without delay, they started a fire to test it, but no smoke came out after several minutes, which was illogical. After a busy day, this result was unacceptable. To ensure a peaceful sleep that night, they had no choice but to cut open the surrounding waterproof fabric to let the smoke out. At Victor's side, until now, they still didn't have a proper dwelling and had chosen an old crooked tree as a support for their makeshift shelter. First, they cleaned up the excess branches. Then, they found some logs and placed them on top. However, due to different lengths, they made little progress by midday. This led to both of them blaming each other. After 2.5 hours, they finally built the frame. Just as they were ready to lay the tarpaulin, they realized a large piece was missing from the top. This is the result of not calculating the dimensions properly when building. After some thought, they decided to go up and saw off the excess wood. At that moment, Victor almost fell but was quickly caught by his teammate. Otherwise, the outcome could have been much worse. With their joint efforts, they successfully wrapped the tarpaulin. However, just then, a storm began. They had just finished packing to move into their new home. When they arrived excitedly at their place, the whole house almost blew away. It looks like even sleeping tonight might be a problem. Moving to the couple team. Today was still a day for harvesting fish. Perhaps due to the terrain, they caught nothing. Considering one cannot always lose in the same spot, they decided to go to the southern waters near the shelter. They set up the fishing net in the small boat there. Over at Nicholas's side, he found a straight bamboo pole while walking in the morning. He decided to make a fishing rod with it. He wrapped the broken parts with tape from the first aid kit. Then he cut off the iron rings from the tarpaulin and taped them one by one onto the bamboo pole. Of course, he didn't forget the reel. Once the gear was ready, he eagerly went to the lakeside. Surprisingly, his first cast went smoothly. The bamboo pole's elasticity was quite fitting. However, he stopped laughing when the fishing rod broke in half on the second cast. His brother couldn't help but laugh at this scene. Over at the sisters' side, while other contestants worried about fish, they easily caught a big fish. Coincidentally, today was also the younger sister's birthday, perfect for cooking a big meal. After hauling all the fishing nets ashore, they successfully caught 4 or 5 wild trout. At the same time, Casper was also quite lucky, catching 8 fish in one go. He brought them directly back to camp to roast over a big fire. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. As time moved to day 10, Nicholas and his brother finally moved the fireplace outside. They connected the previous chimney to the stove, so that each time they made a fire outside, the inside would also feel the heat. It's just unknown if they would freeze if it rained. After completion, they quickly brewed a pot of berry tea. Taste-wise, it was sweet and sour, with vitamins at least 10 times that of beef. Back to Casper's side. Last night's strong wind almost froze them, so today's main task was to build a fireplace. Even such a simple task led to both starting to slack off. They struggled to build the chimney's foundation, then supported the basic frame with branches, and covered it with mud for sealing. Such a chimney was expected to work very well. By day 12, there were still 5 teams left. Nicholas and his brother got up early. Today was still a day to check the fishing nets. First, they came to one fishing net, and as fish were pulled ashore one by one, they easily caught 5 small lake trout right out of the gate. Without time to celebrate, they hurried to the next location. It has to be said, the resources on the brothers' side were rich. Even the second net was full of catch, ultimately leading to a total of 10 fish caught without surprise. Their luck and skill were unquestionable. They quickly returned to camp to enjoy a big meal. Whether from the shelter or their stored food, the brothers were the most stable team so far. It really shows that there's no harm without comparison. The couple team also came to check the fishing nets. Unexpectedly, there seemed to be a big one under the water, which excited them so much they danced. However, just as they tried to pull it ashore, the big fish escaped with a flick of its tail. The food that was almost in their hands escaped right under their eyes, which was hard for anyone to accept. After hauling the remaining fishing nets ashore, they only caught 2 small fish. But that wasn't the most important part. The key was that the big fish, before escaping, also tore the net, which was undoubtedly a fatal blow for them. Just repairing the fishing net would probably take 2.5 days. Arriving at the couple ANN spot, they have been building a shelter for the past few days. It's a time-consuming and labor-intensive task. They had already finished the fireplace by day 10. Now the task is to swiftly prop up the walls. With insufficient food stores, they have to sit down and rest for most of the day after working only briefly. As each log is put in place, the basic outline of the wilderness cabin is nearly complete. Finally, they cover it with a versatile waterproof tarp, and after tidying up, both lie down and sleep at the campsite. Over at friends Caspar's area, they managed to complete the fireplace after 2 days of hard work. It seems to work quite well, although the gaps around it are too large. They might freeze if it gets windy at night. So they wrap the fireplace with a waterproof tarp, unsure if it will catch fire. To test the smoke exhaust, Caspar starts a fire immediately, but before his friend can shut the door, the thick smoke nearly suffocates him. Unexpectedly, their hard-built fireplace doesn't vent smoke well, which is a tough blow for both. At the sisters' spot, They decide to tidy up the campsite furniture today. They had found a plank days earlier, which Martha quickly turned into a shelf. This not only makes items accessible, but also significantly tidies up the campsite. Their dinner is also excellent, consisting of 2 delicious trout, fried golden brown on both sides. The fish is tender on the inside and crispy on the outside, with a protein content many times that of beef. By day 14, Patrick finds a good fishing spot, but needs to cross a swamp to set up his fish trap. Not wanting to get his clothes wet, he decides to cut down a few trees to use as a bridge. Only 2 or 3 logs are needed, and Patrick cleverly gets the job done, quickly testing the bridge with his girlfriend. Thankfully, they safely reach the other side. By the afternoon, after setting up the fish trap, dinner is 3 small fish to tide them over. Both are struggling, having not changed undergarments in half a month. At the Nicholas brothers' spot, considering the increasingly cold weather, they decide to reinforce the shelter walls. They start by stuffing a bunch of branches inside for support, then collect moss outside to enhance the campsite's insulation. After completing this, the brothers are exhausted and fall asleep within half a minute of lying down. Back with the couple, Anne mentions that today is their first wedding anniversary. To celebrate, they decide to climb the mountain behind them, packing a large bag of blueberries for berry picking as they hike. Shortly after starting, they spot an old moose on the hillside. Encountering such uncatchable protein, they keep a steady pace forward. The mountain trail is rough, forcing them to rest frequently. After drinking some clean, sanitary mountain spring water, they continue their ascent. As they climb, Bjorn's life experiences enrich. Some things would be regrettable if not done. After 2.5 hours of trekking, the couple reach the summit, and the breathtaking view revives their spirits. At the couple's spot, since the previously built fire didn't provide much heat, they plan to dismantle it and rebuild. However, before starting, Patrick's girlfriend says it won't work because the stones are too round to stack properly. She leaves Patrick speechless with just a few words. Wanting to avoid further argument, Patrick goes out to find new stones. As he and Danielle start building with the new stones, Patrick is pleased with his girlfriend's efforts. She finally gets it right. Then, they divide tasks. Danielle goes berry picking, while Patrick looks for soft moss for bedding, necessary to keep warm during the cold nights, even when huddled together. Arriving at the sister duo Camilla's location, she decided to gather materials to build a proper double bed for their daily comfort. After cutting a few logs, she felt dizzy and saw stars, clearly due to low blood sugar. As progress was slow alone, her sister Martha joined her, and they quickly constructed the bed's basic frame, then covered it with branches. Soon, a warm and comfortable double bed was ready. As darkness fell, they hurried into the bed and fell asleep. On the 15th day, the situation for Caspar and Victor was not optimistic. They had not caught any fish for 2 days, surviving only on berries. Checking the fishing nets at the lake again yielded no results, leading them to vent their frustrations on camera. Their long-standing friendship made it difficult for them to consider quitting. However, on the 16th day, a yacht sped across the lake, indicating a contestant had given up. Unsurprisingly, the friends decided to withdraw from the competition, not due to lack of food, but missing their families. Their understanding and friendship grew despite not winning. By the 17th day, after a night of rain, Danielle's shelter was soaked through, ruining her mood. After discussing with Patrick, they decided to cover the roof with a waterproof tarp. The continued cold made them shiver, and Danielle was too cold to help much. Eventually, they managed to cover the roof with sticks. With no fish caught again, they resigned themselves to hunger in the camp, losing confidence in their persistence. Meanwhile, the brother duo Nicholas faced worsening weather, so they used waterproof bags to keep their shelter dry. Surprised by the day's strong winds and waves, they quickly moved to secure their fishing nets from being washed away. Hunger made their efforts clumsy, and even led to arguments. Once the nets were secured, they realized the futility of their dispute and quickly made up. They ended the day with 4 trout for dinner, needing to stay warm in their well-insulated shelter. The married couple faced several days of storms that nearly destroyed their boat, which they had to reinforce and cover with a waterproof tarp. For lunch, they caught a 2.5-pound fish, small but sufficient. The cold weather soon numbed Anne's fingers, forcing her to warm her hands in an unusual way, while Bjorn handled the fish. Simultaneously, the sister duo also managed to set up their fishing nets at the lake, hoping for a good catch. On the 18th day, Anne finished sealing gaps in their shelter to keep out the cold night winds. They built a large fire outside and enjoyed a simple breakfast of 2 delicious fish, expertly cooked by Bjorn, whose culinary skills were impressive. The meat was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, looking even more protein-rich than beef. However, the weather soon changed unexpectedly. Shortly after, a strong wind began to blow over the lake. It was a good time to perform a spot jump. If the wind got any stronger, one might even take off. Over at the sisters' duo, the early bird proverb proved true. They checked their fish trap and easily caught 4 fish. With renewed energy, Camilla decided to craft a toy wooden board because she noticed her sister Martha was feeling down. She wanted to cheer them both up. After 2.5 hours of hard work and finishing with charcoal circles, a basic game board was ready, using stones as game pieces. Nicholas and his brother didn't need to worry about food at the moment. They started collecting dry wood by the lake as the weather was turning colder, preparing for what lies ahead. After finishing, Emil headed back to rest at the camp, while Nicholas kept going, fortifying the camp's gate with logs and covering it with a tarp and moss, significantly raising the camp's temperature. It was so warm inside that one could feel comfortable, even without clothes. The couple was fortunate today, finding 4 fish in their trap. Danielle, thrilled by the shore, was relieved to finally have meat after a long time. They snuggled together full and content as night fell, with only the cold weather to disturb their comfort. On the 20th day, after a week of rainy weather, it cleared up. With nothing else to do, Anne decided to take a boat out on the lake to enjoy the scenery, appreciating life despite the hardships. However, this happiness was fleeting, as survival required constant protein searching, which could take a toll on one's mental state. Sitting by the shore, the couple contemplated withdrawing from the competition, depending on how much food they could gather. Back with the brothers, taking advantage of the good weather, they decided it was time for a bath, as the environment had left them quite smelly. They were the most stable team in the competition and likely to win. Meanwhile, the couple saw 2 moose running across the hill while standing at their door. Without proper hunting tools and too weak from hunger, Patrick could only watch them go. Then, a yacht arrived for a routine medical checkup by the show's crew to ensure everyone's health. When the doctors came to the couple, they learned Danielle was severely cold, risking forced withdrawal if conditions didn't improve. Back at camp, Patrick decided to modify the fireplace to increase its heat output, hoping to keep Danielle warm enough to continue. The sisters, tired of eating fish, decided to hike for wild berries, encountering a bear-scratched log that scared them. To lighten the mood, they mimicked a bear by lying down to eat berries directly off the ground. As day 22 dawned, the teams began checking their fish traps. The brother and sister duos did well, catching several trout each. However, Patrick had less luck, finding nothing and barely making it through the night. By day 23, a yacht sped towards them, likely indicating someone couldn't continue. As expected, it was Patrick and Danielle. Danielle's health had deteriorated due to the cold, and the lack of fish only compounded their decision to withdraw from the competition. It's such a pity. Although they didn't win the championship, the couple's relationship has grown stronger. After packing their bags, the couple sadly exited the competition on day 23. 3 pairs of contestants remained in the field. Just as Nicholas was leaving, he suddenly spotted a reindeer and cautiously followed it to the mountaintop. To his surprise, he found the reindeer's den with at least a dozen of them feeding in the area. Nicholas was even less than 10 meters away from them. Unfortunately, he didn't have the right hunting tools and could only watch from a distance. Later, the brothers checked their fishing nets by the lake with their gear. Due to the colder weather, the fish had mostly moved to deeper waters. After checking, they only caught 3 small fish, which was hardly enough for the brothers. Emil wanted to return to camp to eat berries, but he slipped and fell, camera and all. His pained expression suggested a likely knee injury. He rested on the spot for half an hour. Thankfully, the injury wasn't severe, and not wanting his brother to tease him, he quickly returned to camp. Meanwhile, Nicholas had just finished processing the fish. As they say, like brother, like brother. Nicholas had just picked up the fish to return to camp when he too fell. The brothers were in sync even in their falls. To add a special flavor to their fish, They collected some juniper berries and also gathered a large bag of dry firewood. How to cook it would have to be figured out back at camp. At the couple's camp, even with the luxury of a wilderness cabin, the problem of smoke inside the cabin remained unsolved. Every attempt to warm up inside ended with them being smoked out. Despite trying other methods, all attempts failed. Not wanting to freeze in camp for this reason, the couple decided on a third reconstruction. They cut 3 sturdy tree trunks from nearby and decided to construct a higher chimney on the roof. Although the task was not massive, both were very weak, and even sawing a tree trunk was strenuous. Half a day's work required a half-hour rest right there. Afterward, they tied the logs into a tripod, placed it on the roof, and wrapped it with a waterproof cloth. However, despite long efforts, it still didn't achieve the desired effect. Frustrated, Bjorn cut an even longer tree trunk, hoping to prop the chimney higher, but nearly got hit by a stick in the process, which infuriated him, leading to a fight with his wife. They wondered when these hard days would end. After a brief adjustment in attitude and joint effort, they finally completed the difficult task. They hurried back to camp to see the effects, and surprisingly, the smoke inside the cabin had significantly lessened. For dinner, they had leftover dried fish from previous days. Considering it was his wife's birthday, they made the meal special. The golden brown fish was a luxurious treat, surely richer in protein than beef. On the sisters' side, they cooked 2 wild fish for breakfast. Camilla decided it was time to change her underwear. Removing it, she sniffed it and almost threw up the fish from yesterday, showing the hardships of not bathing for over 20 days. After packing up, the sisters decided to go mushroom picking in the nearby mountains, thankful for the rich plant resources. They soon found a mushroom, a fine wilderness delicacy, and packed it to take away. 1 mushroom wasn't enough to fill them, so they went to check the fishing nets by the lake. They thought the net would be twisted up, but surprisingly, there were still fish caught in it, though just a small one, but enough for the sisters. After a full meal, they lay down in camp, ending another beautiful day. On the brothers' side, they were currently the wealthiest contestants. Besides the mountains of dry firewood at their camp, they were also doing well with fish. A casual check by the lake usually yielded 7 or 8 fish, and even today, they had the luxury of adding fish roe to their meal. Briefly rinsed in water, fresh ingredients must be eaten in their original flavor for authenticity. Thus, the brothers immediately enjoyed sashimi. Definitely tastier than fish meat. The protein content is many times that of beef, to avoid diarrhea and not being able to pull up their pants. The rest was packed and taken back to camp for cooking. Upon returning, they cooked over high heat without a word. After just a few minutes, the delicious caviar was ready. Indeed, cooked is more satisfying to eat. A small bite provides plenty of energy. They decided to make smoked fish from the caught fish. Prepared trout were hung on tree branches. Branches were used to keep them open for better flavor infusion. To add a special flavor, Emil collected some juniper branches nearby, not only to produce plenty of smoke, but to add a leafy aroma to the flavor, smoked over high heat for over 3 hours. As the fish turned golden brown, the fragrant aroma spread instantly. Look at the vibrant color of the smoked fish slices. The brothers couldn't wait to enjoy the deliciousness. This flavor and texture are simply unbeatable. After lunch, Nicholas even made a sign for their camp to boost their morale. Among the couple team, being the only contestants with a boat, they could always set their nets in deep water, certainly satisfied with their catch. As fish after fish was brought ashore, easily caught over 20 fish, securing their meals for the week. As long as their spirits are high, winning is definitely within reach. On day 26, to stabilize their life, Ann and Bjorn started setting up nets again. However, the weather seemed off today. After half a day's effort, they still couldn't set the nets. Finally, under Bjorn's persistent effort, they completed the task back at camp. They didn't rest. Instead, they started collecting firewood for the winter. Although life was tough, the couple was still confident in winning the competition. Arriving at Camilla's side. So far, she had been drinking urine for about 10 days. According to her, some components in the urine could supplement nutrients to the body. Watching her sister's bizarre methods, Martha didn't know what to say. After packing their gear, they prepared to enjoy the mountain scenery. Their bodies were already low on energy. Continuous trekking exhausted them further, but each time they were healed by the beautiful view. hoping this spirit would help them last longer. Back to the Nicholas brothers. Today, while checking the nets, the fish they caught accidentally escaped. Originally 4 fish, now only 3 remained. Truly unlucky. Upon hearing this, Emil was dumbfounded by his brother. Seeing the fish supply dwindling, the coming days would be tougher. On day 27, 3 teams remained in the competition. The Nicholas brothers had been stable from the start, daily dinners of plump trout. No worries about hunger here. Early in the morning, the brothers checked the nets as usual. Even before pulling the net ashore, Nicholas already saw the catch beneath the water. Eventually, they caught 12 fish without surprise, with 7 smoked fish slices hanging at camp. The brothers had no worries about finding protein, since tasting the benefits of smoked fish slices. Upon returning, Nicholas immediately started a campfire. Whenever possible, he'd smoke the caught fish. Though their camp had piles of firewood, this motivation was still not enough for the brothers. Before enjoying lunch, they went outside to collect more firewood. Keeping busy every day made time fly. Back to the couple team. A few days ago, they encountered a hunter. Sometimes, while checking the nets underwater, they could see distant boats floating. Yet, such encounters had no impact on them. Today's lunch was still the monotonous grilled fish slices. Long-term intake of the same nutrients caused their weight to drop. However, to avoid hunger, they had no other choice. Besides repeatedly checking the nets every day, the couple had nothing else to do. But at that moment, a helicopter suddenly flew overhead. According to their account, a hunter had killed 2 elks here a few days ago. They guessed today's visit was to retrieve the elk bodies, which was undoubtedly good news for the pair. They hoped to find leftovers from the hunter. Moving forward cautiously bit by bit, they soon located their target. After the helicopter left, the duo rushed to the carcass. Unfortunately, the meat had already been removed, leaving only the skin and a pile of organs. However, for the pair who ate fish daily, this was satisfying enough. They quickly found the elk's heart, and even a whole liver. They had planned to take the elk's head too, but had to abandon this plan when the hunter's helicopter quickly returned. Feeling guilty, they fled the site. While they didn't take much, they were relieved to finally have a change of taste. Back at camp, the couple was all smiles, looking at the rich liver meat. They sliced it thickly and cooked it over high heat. In just over 10 minutes, a delicious elk meat feast was ready. They eagerly tasted it, finding the meat neither tough nor dry, with a freshness that hit the back of the head, surely containing far more protein than beef. Meanwhile, the sister duo, having starved for days, finally had a good day. They caught 4 wild trout, their excitement obvious. Back at camp, they didn't rush to cook but started carving their own little toys, a necessity for them. In just 2.5 hours, Camilla had made 3 or 4. After a short break, they collected dry wood for cooking. As night fell, they enjoyed their dinner. On day 29, the Nicholas brothers were gathering berries by the lake. Besides protein, getting vitamins was crucial. Just then, a yacht arrived. It was the doctor coming to check their health. After weighing them, the doctor expressed concern about Nicholas's health, who had lost 12 kilograms since the start. If he continued to lose weight at this rate, he would be forced to leave the show. Considering the seriousness, Nicholas began to eat breakfast voraciously, mainly to avoid disqualification for being underweight. However, upon returning to camp, he found his brother Emil bedridden with a cold. This was not good news, and it seemed he would have to take care of his brother for the coming days. On the sisters' side, something had happened. They had set their shelter on fire, and then started singing nearby, clearly ready to go home. As a yacht approached slowly, the sisters stated they were tired of this life, not because they couldn't find food, but because it was too boring. They had thought about leaving it to a draw to decide whether to stay, but fate was not on their side. So, without further ado, they called to withdraw. Although they didn't win, losing 20 kilograms each had some benefit. They packed up and regretfully left the competition. Now only 2 teams remained. Emil, weak and sick, and Nicholas checked their fishing nets, but it seemed the fish were all gone. Not catching even a single fish was disappointing, especially since Emil was working despite his illness. Concerned, Nicholas decided to go out and find something to fill their stomachs. Berries became the natural choice. After picking for 4 to 5 hours, he collected a full bag. Back at camp, He quickly brewed some berry tea for Emil, hoping it would help his cold improve. Meanwhile, Anne, in another boat, found their fishing net empty as expected. So they ended up sitting by the shore, roasting the leftover deer meat from the previous day. Once people have free time, their mindset changes too. By day 30, a strong wind swept across the island again. At that moment, a yacht appeared on the lake. Was it the couple wanting to quit, or the brothers unable to continue? The camera then switched to Anne and Bjorn standing on the shore. They said they were simply too bored, doing the same things every day. Anyone would struggle with that. With nothing to do, and time moving slowly, they decided to go home. It was truly regrettable. With their skills and supplies, lasting till the end was definitely possible. But sometimes reality is harsh. Finally, they packed their bags and sadly exited the competition. Now, only the brothers remained. After caring for Emil day and night for 2 days, Emil's health had greatly improved. By day 32, he was almost back to full energy. The brothers had planned to sit by the shore and drink tea, but suddenly a yacht sped towards them. Nicholas was worried about being disqualified for not meeting the weight requirement and felt uneasy. The show crew then presented a notebook telling them that every 30 days they could receive blessings from their families. They thought it was just a regular family check-in, but the video from their parents and family announced them as the final champions. The brothers couldn't have been happier. They quickly went into the camp, picked up the trophy they had carved, which was inscribed with their experiences here. It was only when they lifted the trophy together that their worries finally vanished. Winning the championship in just over 30 days was unexpected. In the end, taking all their luggage and the $500,000 prize, the brothers joyfully boarded the yacht home.